an alcoholic? I don't remember exactly where we were. I think Sandy was closing up with Clarence's kind of technical start of the first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and kind of one of the apocryphal stories that I remember, and I don't know, it was alluded to in one of the histories of AA that well, we were trying to name our organization, that we had a writer from like the New Yorker magazine that was in a mental hospital that came to a meeting, and they were arguing about the name of the book, and he said, why don't you call it Anonymous Alcoholics? And they played with it, and it kind of came out, and Alcoholics Anonymous, they kind of liked that. He went back to the mental institution, never to return to Alcoholics Anonymous. There have been lots of people who have come just in time, great little stories of, we had a gay member of Alcoholics Anonymous who had a tailor shop, who hawked his tailor shop to come up with $500 to kind of save the book project. When we were doing that, we had they're just, when Bill was offered the job at Towns Hospital, you think of so many things that could have changed. Charles Towns was a guy who started Towns Hospital, and it was a very prominent, during the 20s, it was really a big deal, and all the big shots would come in, and we would detox through, Towns Hospital. And when he kind of saw what Bill was doing and the success of it, he really wanted to kind of rejuvenate, because Towns Hospital had fallen somewhat on hard times during the Depression. And you think of Bill not having a job. This is, for a couple of years. Lois, where they're really doing what they're living in, little rooms and couches all over heck, and he gets offered a job with a stable salary, and he goes back to a group of people who are sober months that are in his house with this idea, which really didn't sound like that bad of an idea. And God gave him the wisdom to have the conversation that waved Bill off that, and Bill, who we talk about as a real promoter, allowed himself to be waved off, allowed himself to have our fellowship be self-supporting and not follow his inclination to raise money. I mean, he was a fascinating man, and I don't know that we could have had a better. One of the things that I want to add to the process, and this, I don't want to sound controversial, but I wanted to bring it up. Bill had a suspicion of absolutes. He had a suspicion of things that were black and white. He had a suspicion of things that you had to believe because of our, somewhat because of our contrary nature. And I get one of the historians that I was reading, when Bill wrote the 12 and 12, one of the reasons he wrote the 12 and 12 is he felt that the big book was becoming an object of worship in Alcoholics Anonymous, that we were codifying ourselves to a degree. Now, it's interesting because I think all of us think the big book is inspired. I don't think any of us think that a person with 3 years of sobriety could have written this book that has stood the test of time in all the different ways that it has. And for those of us that continue to study and interact with it, the beauty of it and the depth of it, and how well it stands up to other spiritual literature, things that are true seem to be true, and there's such great strengths in it. But when you take something and you start to make it an object, when you think you can reduce everything that you need to know to 164 pages, when you think that all you really have to do to be an expert in Alcoholics Anonymous is memorize 164 pages, what you've done is you've memorized the menu. It is not the food. It is a description of the food. It is the treasure map to where the food is. It is the donkey that you ride to the door that you have to dismount to enter the door. And through the door, you get to have the experience. And the experience is what alters us. And our program at every level is, when Bill did the manuscript, one of the things that they were concerned with, and they never really solved with this, the factions in Alcoholics Anonymous, that the conservatives wanted much more God. The liberals wanted it to be psychological. There were the atheists and the agnostics that, wanted no God in it. So those were kind of the three different camps that came in, and it was a conflict that they never particularly solved. And it is extraordinary as you get older. I mean, when I first read the big book, I don't know whether because I was so conflicted spiritually that I ignored some of the more spiritual passages of the book, and I, kind of focused on what appealed to me and what I liked. But I mean, the book is, just couldn't be any more straightforward. That you got a problem that only a spiritual solution can resolve. That that you are not God. That you are powerless. That there has to be a surrender experience. You have to find that power and put that power into your life and maintain it in your life. That the process of this book and the process of our program is to maintain our spiritual condition. And that's our program. But Bill softened, I mean, even though the words are very direct, in the manuscript he was recommended that they soften a little bit. He did soften a little bit. But what he also did, the story section, which is so Alcoholics Anonymous, was to counterbalance, kind of because if all we had was the first 164 pages, it was a layout of the program saying you must find God, you must find him now. God's either, everything or nothing, and all the sorts of things that we're engaged in. Then he, sets up with 28 stories that allows you to start to interact with, sitting down like on a 12-step call, listening to someone tell their story. And there are 3 different comments in the book. The one we always say are, our stories disclose in a general way what we were like, what happened, and what we're like now. There are 2 others, places where it said that our stories are a description of how we found God. And that was the purpose of the book, was to tell in our own language our experience, which again, you can't argue with. And I just think the wisdom and the strength that we were given to have our program. Today, I was reading a book just recently on called The New Christianity. I think it's called that. And it said the primary difference today that they think about the new Christianity is that what it was to be a good Christian 25, 35 years ago was that you had to believe certain things. And we have moved away from that very substantially, from dogma, to trying to gain access to the transformational aspects of the spirituality of the different religious movements, so that you can get your hands on the dials that help bring the power into our lives, to transform our lives into being better. And what AA forces, because we are so irreverent, because we have, I think, one of the great BS monitors. I don't know where you would go, because we are all prevaricators, and we are experts online and BSing. But really, we are. I mean, you sit in a meeting, and we don't care if you would say something that wasn't the way we would say it, or if you say something that we don't believe or think might even be a little bit off. If it's genuine for you, that's okay. We have absolute tolerance if it's your experience and you're sharing from where, unless it's intellectual. If it's just out of your head, we will more or less ignore it. Okay. Now, because of that mindset in our program, we are basically mostly interested in your experience. So as a result, we have kind of forced ourselves in our culture to have and develop an experience with sobriety, the program, and with our God. And so what many people are now kind of discovering, that is they're getting their hands on the power that starts to change and transform their lives. That's one of the great strengths in our fellowship, is that the way we communicate and the way we share is that.
Did that move by itself?
I'm not going to say that. I don't want you to read too much into that.
Oh, well. Let's see, I got a couple points I want to go back to because I just enjoy them. One of the great characters that we mentioned earlier was Hank Parkhurst. And Bob mentioned that he wrote the chapter to the employer. He was a executive at Standard Oil. So in that chapter, when he said, I had 5,000 people working for me, he did. And his alcoholism cost him everything, and he came to Towns Hospital, came out of there. Bill got a hold of him, along with Jim Burwell, who was another guy who started AA up in Philadelphia, and Fitz Mayo, who started it in D.C., where I got sober. And these people were big helps because they were around and energy givers and thinkers and all of that. And Hank had set up a little deal in New Jersey where he was going to form a co-op for gasoline stations. And if he got enough of them, they could buy oil and gas cheap, and he would make a little money off of it. So he offered Bill a job there. And that's how Bill ended up over in that office. But mostly they 12-step people that'd be in there. And the secretary that he had working for him was named Ruth Hauk, who ended up typing the big book in that office and became Bill's secretary for quite a few years up in the New York office. And anyway, Hank had purchased, or his share of the big book was 1/3. And so he had a lot of shares outstanding. And he also started falling in love with Ruth Hauk. So he came up with this plan that he was going to leave his wife and run off with Ruth, and everything was going to be wonderful. We're getting the book going, and we're every da. And Ruth turned him down, and he was convinced that Bill talked her into it, turning him down. So he copped a big resentment and went out and got drunk. And then he'd be sober, and then he'd be drunk, and he ended up out in Cleveland. And that, if you heard earlier that Clarence Snyder and Bill weren't getting along, well, he fed Clarence a lot of information about Bill, none of which was true. That Bill was taking money and putting it over here and doing all this stuff. And it caused such a row that Bill had to go out there with all the books from New York and showed it to all the people. When they got through, they apologized for dragging him out there.
They had an audit done.
Yep, they had an audit and everything to settle this thing. Because, you know, you get these stories started in AA, and all of a sudden they're real, and they're being repeated rapidly. Not that we gossip in here. So about that time, they decided that they wanted AA to own the book and not the shareholders. So they wanted to go out and buy all the shares back. And some people gave them back, et cetera. But the last chunk was Hank Parkhurst, and he didn't want to give them back. But he was broke. And when they moved, after he left, they moved the office to New York, and they took the office furniture that was there. So when he came to the New York office, he accused them of stealing all the furniture out of New Jersey. And Bill said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pay you for the furniture if you'll give me the shares back. And he paid him the money and got the shares back. And then later Hank was very bitter that Bill had cheated him out of the shares. And it just shows you get resentments going. I mean, it's when they say resentment are the number one offender, they're not kidding. And so, but Hank, Bill was so sorry because the guy was so instrumental in keeping the energy going when it was in the very beginning. And Burwell was another one. He was a power driver, but he also, like Parkhurst, was a former atheist, a former non-believer who had just slowly changed his mind. And there was a lot more of that in New York than there was in Akron. In Akron, everybody was happy with Christianity. And in New York, they were more, let's hide the God stuff in the back. And we'll get a psychological, we'll talk about psychological problems, and we'll get the alcoholic in that way. And then once we got them, then slowly get to the God part. So we don't want all this God stuff up front. Well, now you're going to write the steps, and that's where the fight came. If you left it up to Akron, it would have been Jesus. If you left it up to New York, we wouldn't have mentioned God till page 160. So they had to find a middle ground, and it was God as you understand him. And it set us all free. Because you can come in here with whatever it is, and that's acceptable. They ended up saying, these steps will put you in touch with a power, and then you decide what it was. And there is no AA God. There is none. There's none. There just isn't. There's a method of getting in touch with this power, and then your experience will tell you what this power is. So it's one thing to know about God, but the real jackpot is to know God, to experience God in your heart. And I think we see that in the promises when it says we suddenly realize God is doing for us. So that was one thing, and then the other thing Bob touched on was the absolutes, again showing the difference between Akron, Cleveland, and New York. The four absolutes of the Oxford movement were essential. I mean, they were very, very powerful part of the thing. And it was assumed they would come into AA. But Bill was afraid that you get a new alcoholic and you're telling him to be absolutely honest and absolutely unselfish, that this is, we try to be perfect. We're going to drive ourselves crazy trying to be perfectly honest, and then we're going to end up getting drunk. So he didn't think it would be a good idea. But to this day, the Cleveland Intergroup prints a publication called The Four Absolutes, and there's a big write-up about them, and on the back it says AA. And New York can't do anything about it because Cleveland came first. And so if you like collector's items, contact the Cleveland group and get the pamphlets, The Four Absolutes. And it's just fun to have, and then you get an idea. And so they didn't make it into the big book. But Bill wrote a letter later on, and he said, we didn't take the absolutes in the big book, but I snuck them into the 12 and 12 in steps 6 and 7. And when you get to step 6, you suddenly find he's talking about perfection. Having had a perfect release from alcohol, we have to raise our eyes towards perfection. If you study that. And so that's where he brought this in. So the way I look at it, the big book is progress, not perfection, but the 12 and 12 is progress towards perfection. We have to raise our eyes because we were given a perfect release from alcohol. I haven't thought about taking a drink in 44 years. That's a perfect release. And it was because I became entirely willing to have it removed. So he's saying if we could develop the same amount of willingness, we could have anything removed. And that's a different target than what's in the big book. So that was just an aside. So don't go crazy trying to become perfect, but it's in there.
There were other things that were going on, other people that were working in the field of alcoholism and trying to help alcoholics. There were a couple that were fairly significant, and one of the books that we used early in Alcoholics Anonymous was The Common Sense of Drinking by Peabody. And Peabody had a kind of a treatment facility that was about 5 blocks away from the Calvary Mission. And if you read the book, Common Sense of Drinking by Peabody, you will see almost lifts of it that are in the big book. Now, some of that is also due to the common, to me, when you read Sermon on the Mount, there was a way of speaking in the 30s when people would write spiritual material that there was a commonality about the words they used and the way they used them. And it was almost a musical, wonderful, literary way of sharing some of that. And it's always kind of interesting when you go back in history to say, why did one movement or why did one, it seems like, and I think most of us feel like it's just a series of miracles that our fellowship One of the interesting things to me is you look at Ebby. The two other things. Okay, let's just take Ebby for a moment. Ebby had trouble maintaining his sobriety. I don't know how much sobriety he had the first. Did he have almost 2 years, a year and a half?
I thought it was more than that. I don't know for sure.
But before too long, Ebby started to go back to drinking and was unable to maintain his sobriety. Bill referred to Ebby as a sponsor all the way through his life until Ebby died. And later, a group of Texans came up to New York, and they were asking Bill, is there anything we can do for you? You know, you do so much for us. And Bill said, yeah, would you take a whack at Ebby? And so they went out and found Ebby and took him back to Texas. And Ebby maintained 7.5 years of sobriety while he lived in Fort Worth and with Circe Whalen and the different, the people that were surrounding. That was one of the happiest, best times of his life. He ended up working for a guy that had I think he had an airport, but it was an airplane supply business. And he was kind of a purchasing agent or controller for that company. And then later on, he fell in love with a woman. And Ebby kind of thought that if he could get the right job and the right woman, his life was. And there are historic people in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you listen to them. I felt a little that way when I first heard Bill Dodson talk. They didn't get it. For Ebby to be as close as he was to our fellowship, to be as instrumental, to be literally the carrier of the message to Bill Wilson, not a small thing. I mean, but when you listen to the man talk, he never understood what it was. He never got it. And our essential experience, the strength of it, when we talk about, that one group wanted all God and one group wanted not much God, to me the fascinating thing about our program is based on surrender and conversion. Now, you could use those words as religious terms, but if you come in, you've got to hit bottom. You've got to surrender. The surrender collapses the ego. When that opens up, then all of a sudden you have this transformation that happens either all at once or happens over a period of time. And, the fundamental ideas that were once, part of the main structure of our lives suddenly get cast aside and a new set of ideas come in. And for most of us that have, found our place in Alcoholics Anonymous, we've had that experience either quickly or slowly over a period of time. And it's not like an improvement. It's more like a sex change operation. I mean, it is not linear. It's a transformation. It is nonlinear. And I think in any other context, and we reinforce that. The word alcoholic has been an unpopular word in society since the beginning of time. And one of the things that we do, if you look back into first century Christianity, one of the things that was supposed to maintain a sense of humility and openness is that we were sinners. One of the things that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous when we say when we say, my name is Bob and I'm an alcoholic, we reinforce the idea of why we're in those rooms. It's not that we were alcoholic, we are alcoholic. And that all of us know the fragility of that, and yet we know the strength that comes out of the fact that we're powerless. And it's a dichotomy. You can't, it's but it is the core, and I think one of the great powers, because we constantly reinforce the fact that we are not God, that we need God, that we are powerless, that we have surrendered, and that is the very context in which we have all the conversations that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know how you could have a more powerful context for a spiritual conversation as it relates to life today and what people don't understand. You came in 1964. Why do you still go to those meetings? And people don't understand that. They don't understand, that is our way of maintaining our spiritual condition. If we don't maintain our spiritual condition, we are a troubled group. We are clearly, at least a sandwich short of a picnic, and that we need each other. The book was probably the seminal thing that changed from the time we got the book, we went from 400 members to 8,000 members in a relatively short period of time, and it has been the I don't like the word codification, but the unity, the being able to pass our message to another person in a printed form, allowed us uniformity and access to the information that we've had that transformed our society. And it certainly has stood the test of time. I just want to mention quickly two things that also, I think, assisted Bill in maintaining. Founders of an organization always have a problem. They don't seem to ever be able to become members. And if we talk about what happened when Bill and Bob turned the fellowship over to the fellowship, turned Alcoholics Anonymous over to the fellowship. But around the time, just after the book was written, Bill developed, Father Dowling showed up at Bill's door, and Bill was living above the clubhouse on 24th Street or wherever the heck it was, and he didn't want to talk to another drunk, and all of a sudden this little Irishman who limped, had a cane, came in and talked to Bill, and he kind of became an important spiritual advisor to Bill. It was not too long after that that Bill also turned to Tebow for psychiatric help. That Bill started to investigate in some of the aspects of the chronic immaturity of the alcoholic, and that's the great grandiosity that we, which is the yin and the yang that goes through the fabric of our lives. I alluded a little bit to that last night in my own personal problems that I'm having today. It is just fantastic that we have both those things alive, both ends of the spectrum, seemingly alive. And Bill's relationship with Tebow was a fascinating one. And Tebow, who was on the board of Alcoholics Anonymous for many, many years, the conversations they had were very pithy conversations. And there were lots of disagreements, but lots of guidance, and they gave a lot of strength to each other.
I just want to pick up on what Bob said about when we identify ourselves as an alcoholic, how that is so humble. It really is an essential part of the program. My name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. It constantly says, I'm not perfect. And when I sponsor people, I go to a club down in Tampa called Yana, You Are Not Alone. They have noon meetings. And one of them came in and said, God, I was standing out in front, and somebody who's not in AA went by, and they said, what's going on in there? And he said, I didn't know what to tell them. And I said, next time they ask you that, let me see if you can tell them this. Oh, we're people who can't make it through life on our own. That's what I'm an alcoholic means. But our egos don't like that. Did your ego like that? I didn't see everybody go, yeah, I really like that. It was like, hey. Well, why are we there? Because we need help on a daily basis. We can't. See, we're free to admit. Now, when you try to make it through life on your own, it is tough. And you can look at a lot of society and see the wear and tear of people trying to make it through life on their own because their pride says they have to. So we're lucky that we say that word all the time. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a person who can't make it by myself. So I'm in here. And then that's what everybody else is. There's nobody in there who's going, I don't need this. And that's what we all have in common. That's why when we start to talk, we're talking from the level of, I'm not perfect. I got a lot of problem areas. And then we all connect because that's real. The other thing I go to a big book study. I just love big book studies. Stuff is in the book that wasn't there the last time you went through. I never saw that. But if you're in a big book study, next time you go through, imagine yourself and look at how the book is written. The book is written to a person who got it in the mail. who's going to do this all by himself or herself. He's going to take himself all the way through the steps. And when you read that, it says, now, when you finish this, then you're going to be doing this. And here's an inventory. Now you go out and find somebody, a priest or somebody in the neighborhood. Go take this fifth step with him. Now go out and start making these amends. And you're just going, well, nobody ever did that. I can't imagine somebody just get the book in the mail and then, well, that's how AA got started in many, many cities and towns. The book arrived in the mail and someone followed it all the way through. And when you get to the chapter working with others, it's talking about how wonderful it's going to be when this new society springs up about you. There's going to be these new alcoholics. Yeah, and you're going to go find them. You're the only one right now. But Bill sells it as this is the most exciting part of everything. Now that you've done all this, you're praying and meditating. Now you're going to go out and get these other people. And picture yourself getting the book in the mail, is what I'm saying, when you go through it this time. See if you could have been able to raise yourself up to that energy level to go racing out, finding other alcoholics to share. So we owe a lot of gratitude to a lot of nameless people in, you know what I mean, all over the country. And we don't keep good history. You know, they go back down and they say, well, who did start AA in a lot of places they don't know. They've lost track. And so they're anonymous, but they're heroes for all of us. They really are.
I have, Sandy's done more of it than I have, but I have done some speaking in AA. And I can think of 10 places that I've gone where they've had the founders of AA that I got a chance to, at least 10 that come quickly to mind. And what they did is, I mean, they got a coffee pot in the book. And they sat down and, you know, put an ad in the paper and, you know, they went and talked to ministers, they went to jails. And many of them, like the guy that I met in Austin, I mean, they did that alone for 6 months. And then they got their first drunk. You know, they were hoping it was going to be, you know, someone who was really ready, and often it wasn't, you know, anybody that was ready at all. And I remember Bob Marceline White, one of my great mentors in Alcoholics Anonymous, when they started the group in Whitney, Texas. You know, Marceline and Bob would go down and set up the coffee pot, and they didn't get another member for months and months and months and months. And if they were getting along, they had an open meeting. If they weren't getting along, they had a closed meeting. And but when the book was written, there were only, by his description, 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but most people feel like that's an exaggeration, that there were probably 70 or 80, you know, that were, you know, kind of regulars and sticking. But they clearly felt that they had been given an answer to the issue of alcoholism. But the idea was that people would be able to take the book and go through it, and I think that, you know, many people have done that over a period of time. Our history is I don't know, I guess all of history is kind of like that. When you take a look at the accidental things of the right people showing up at just exactly the right time, just exactly the people that you need, the money showing up just exactly at the right time, and all the kind of, you know, and the nature, I think, of great spiritual literature, be it the Bible or the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, is that each time you read it, it's new. There is something about reading spiritual literature that when you have it, you don't just get information. If you are really engaged in it, you have an experience. And it's different than other kinds of reading. It engages you at a depth, and that's what I find when I'm in the right place reading the big book or the 12 and 12, is that you really feel like you're having kind of an experience of something beyond, certainly beyond intellect and certainly beyond information when we're interacting with that. And I think that that is one of the signs of its strength and power and greatness.
Tell them about turning the fellowship, Bill turning it over to the...
Okay. No, I don't. But it is, One of the things, I was a friend of Bob Smith Jr.'s, and one of the things Bob Smith Jr. used to say about his dad is he'd say that Bill Wilson could see further down the road than any man he ever met. And Bill Wilson, because of some of his private proclivities, for a while was kind of pushed out of Alcoholics Anonymous into the main role of Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill got interested in dealing with his depression and vitamin therapy, and we all know that he had an LSD, experiment. It was interesting when the other night when I was at that party with the woman who wrote the book on Bill, she said that's greatly exaggerated. She said it was done under medical supervision. Bill had trouble quitting smoking. They thought that if he took LSD that it might help him gain some insight into, but it was supervised with doctors and, his reaction to it over the period of time, so it wasn't, he wasn't doing it at the bathroom in the Greyhound bus terminal. It was a different sort of experience. Bill's interaction with Tebow, one of the great things is that Tebow felt we were a very immature society, that alcoholics were pathologically immature, which is one of the characteristics of us, which I think is unfortunately more accurate than a lot of us would. Growing up is a very serious issue, that we are dependent people, and Bill had this idea that until the fellowship gained full maturity, it would never last. And Bill's goal was to, after he was pushed, design a structure that would give a structure to gain that maturity and to gain its own independence. Because at this time it was very dependent upon the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that Bill Wilson was such a man of influence in our fellowship that everybody just kind of, and today, if you have an argument in New York, I was a delegate, the only thing that you can use in Alcoholics Anonymous to argue is writings of Bill. It's like we don't think God's still alive today. I don't know, if we had to write a book on recovery today, we'd kill ourselves. We literally would. It's just phenomenal how much problems we have doing things today, so we keep reaching backwards into what Bill wrote. But Bill understood this problem, and he thought that we had to move beyond it. When Dr. Bob got sick, Bill had a sense that the fellowship was in danger, that one in 100 people could name a member of the board of directors of Alcoholics Anonymous, that that Bob had died. Bill was already having some emphysema problems. They just don't know what the heck they're going to do, and they take a look at the transition of the fellowship. And so Bill was being pushed by Tebow and by some other people, by Bern Smith, to write the traditions, which were equally as wonderful and as powerful and interesting, and came very much out of his background from an experience in Vermont. And so they wrote the traditions in the middle 40s, and they were published, I think, in the 12 and 12 in 1952 or 1953. They were adopted, I believe, in Cleveland in 1950 by acclamation. Bill, and presented to our fellowship. Many historians feel that Bill undervalued the contribution of the non-alcoholics to Alcoholics Anonymous and minimized the contribution of the Oxford group in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous in an attempt to separate AA and make it a separate organization. In 1955, he corrected that in St. Louis when the theme of the convention was Come of Age. And Bill designed, with help, the service conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in that, right now today in our service structure, we have 135 delegates, we have 21 members of the board of directors of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we have the staff members of the general service office. And the delegates are supposed to be kind of the grassroots contribution of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're kind of set up by population, and the 135 I don't know how many California has, but they must have a dozen. Minnesota has 2. But because it was set up by the population of alcohol. California by far has the most, is the most populous. It's set up by geography and then the structure of the board of Alcoholics Anonymous had 21 members. It had 14 non-alcoholic members and 7 alcoholic members. We had regional trustees, and then we had two trustees at large, one from Canada, one from the United States. Bill pushed very hard. One of the last major things he did was try to change the structure of the balance of the board from non-alcoholics to alcoholics. He felt that until we took responsibility for ourselves, that we were not a mature organization. And that was a fight that Leonard Strong resigned from the board of Alcoholics Anonymous during that fight. He felt that Bill was wrong. Tebow was very much in opposition to it. And Bill pushed and pushed and pushed. A buddy of mine was a delegate in 1963. He said the fights were so bad on the floor that the delegates agreed if it got any worse, they were going to disband the conference. I mean, this was really, they thought the balance of AA was in that motion. It finally, after 5 or 6 years of this going on, they passed it, I believe, in 1964. And when Bill gave the service structure to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and once a year we have a general service meeting in AA in April in New York, and the 135 delegates, 21 members of the Board of Trustees, the staff members comprise the 170 people that are on the floor that decide the business of Alcoholics Anonymous. The decisions that are made in that are considered to be binding on the board, and they are passed by acclamation, and we only take, because of the AA way, we only take decisions that are made by 2/3 of the majority of the people in the room, with the minority opinion being included. That comes right out of Vermont. I mean, that is one person, one vote. That is Bill's hesitancy about absolute power, absolute structure. It comes out of our traditions, and it is something that had allowed a group of people who would tear each other apart to be able to end up with a generally harmonious way of conducting the business of Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill paid tribute to the founders, to the co-founders of, to the people who were integral to Sister Ignatia, to Dr. Bob, to Tebow, to Dowling, to Sam Shoemaker, who was one of the seminal people in the deal, and he had kind of Shoemaker's feelings were kind of hurt, and they kind of felt to Henrietta Seiberling, who always felt that Bob was underappreciated and Bill was overappreciated. And because the headquarters of Alcoholics Anonymous became New York, it's where our history was written from. And the people, in Akron, some of them, kind of had the feeling that Akron was slighted by that. But I mean, that's the nature of how, things unfold. And certainly Bill was the communicator. I mean, God bless him. He was fabulous. But that structure, today, where we are resting, we would not be alive today except for the tradition, which most people didn't like. One of our founding groups in Minneapolis bought a couple of thousand big books just before the second edition came out, so they didn't have to have the traditions in the book. They did not like there was a lot of controversy around the traditions, and they are the things that have set us in great stead. So for a man to be able to, first of all, take the 6 precepts of the Oxford Group, to synthesize the experience that Alcoholics Anonymous had during the first 4 years, and to be the instrument of God's grace to be able to write our big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And after he wrote the first 2 or 3 chapters, with all the arguments they were having, he was given permission to finish the book. And Bill was the primary author of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then, through the synthesis of the experience that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, to write the traditions, which, I'm talking too much, but there's a saying in medicine that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and what it means that the development of the human race in general parallels the development of the individual human in its development from a seed to birth. And our organization is very alcoholic. It takes on the characteristics of the members that it is comprised of. And it has some of the same issues that we have to deal with in our personal recovery in the 12 steps have to be dealt with organizationally in the program, in the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is handled significantly and very well with the principles of the traditions. We tend to treat them as rules and laws rather than, we never argue about steps. In all the meetings I've ever been to in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've never heard an argument because we so respect them. We argue about the traditions all the time because we have reduced them to rules.
Thank you, sir. Now, this is my, just a personal opinion. Bill was really obsessed with getting Dr. Tebow and a couple of other psychiatrists to agree that AA had matured. It's really stuck in his craw. And if you recall in the 12th step in the 12 and 12, there's that paragraph where he said, we asked a group of eminent psychiatrists and psychologists to look at AA, and this is now up in the 50s. And much to our surprise, they came back and said that we were childish, immature, and grandiose. You've probably seen that in the 12 and 12. And so you could see this became like an obsession. We're grown up. Look, I turned it over to there and this and that. And we changed it. So now the alcoholics are in the majority on the board instead of the non-alcoholics. So my theory is that the I am responsible statement came out of the same origins.
Oh, he did. He picked the themes for the conferences.
You follow what I'm saying?
Very intentional.
Look, Dr. Tebow, we just adopted the saying, I am responsible. Aren't we mature now? Now, I have no idea if that's true, but it really, it's a wonderful statement, but I think we were already helping drunks without being told to. So anyway, that was just one thought.
Why don't we take 15 minutes and do some...
All right, do some questions.
We're supposed to do
Bob
some questions.
likes, this is where he shows off.
And this one actually is for Bob. Please say more about ready to receive and how do you get back to step 2 in those leaky areas after a long term of sobriety. Yeah, that's an hour conversation. I'm doing the best I can right now. What I'm doing is I'm going to 4 or 5 meetings a week on a regular basis, maybe more. My overall goal is to maintain my spiritual condition. When I don't maintain my spiritual condition, I am overwhelmed by the circumstances that are in my life, and they are circumstances, and they just seem to have to do with the crap that I'm dealing with. They're on my computer screen. I do not see a solution. I've got all the stuff, and I obsess with my computer screen and all the stuff that's on it. My experience in life has been that my solutions almost always come from off screen. The other thing I've added, I've always been a pretty hard worker of the steps. And I was at a conference, South Bay Conference recently, and there was a guy by the name of Herb Kay who had a workshop, and he had a workbook. And I don't like workbooks, and I came in with a critical attitude. I didn't think it was going to be very good, and I sat down and I changed my attitude. And I found myself, I see Mike in the audience, and we've been using a little workbook that some of the guys in Gary Brown and some of the men in AA have been using this workbook, which is similar to what Dr. Paul and Jerry J. Did as step workshops that we've been doing over a period of time. But I found myself that I would often go back to the steps, and my interaction with them was perfunctory. I'd almost kind of assume that I had step 1, 2, and 3, and I'd kind of get back and I'd begin to step 4, which is kind of saying what I need is a little bit more information. And I don't believe I need information. I believe I need a change of heart. And what I liked about this workbook is it made me go back and read the first 164 pages. It took me like 5 hours to get through step 1. I had to go read the 12 and 12 in the big book 2 or 3 times, ask myself a bunch of questions. Now, and what it did is engage me more significantly in the work so that I, with 40 years of sobriety, was more engaged with step 1, more engaged with step 2, more engaged with step 3, which is the whole foundation. And I found that I had a lot more issues with step 1, 2, and 3 in the way I live my life today than I thought I did. And I find when I open my heart up and I go back into the work, that I can almost always access it. I cannot snap my fingers and access surrender at will. But, right now I'm having enough trouble that it's easier for me because I'm ground down. And so when I go back into the work, I have, I think, been softened by that process, and that's what I'm doing.
Good answer, buddy. Hi.
It's a great start.
I like it already. I'm having a little trouble overcoming ego and living in the now. Any suggestions? Normally, we don't want to answer questions that only apply to one person in the room. But we'll make an exception today. Holy cow. Overcoming the ego, that's the subject of every religion, of every spiritual book. And so what the hell is it? What are we trying to overcome? My ego is my storyteller. In other words, a raw event happens. It starts raining. That's all that happened. And then my ego looks out and goes, God damn, we were going to play golf and now it's raining. Sucks. Rain sucks. It's awful that it's raining. Do you follow what I'm saying? The rain just is the rain. And so my ego tells stories about everything. And it started telling them when I became aware of myself, probably at age 2. Most people become aware. Up till then, they're just a happy baby playing with things and doing that. And then one day when they're around 2, you reach in to take something away from them, they go, mine. And you go, okay, we got a new ball game. And at that moment, you begin to exist as a separate person. That's where separation from God starts. And since it's impossible to be separated from God, if God is everything, how could you possibly be separated from God? It's absolutely impossible. It's like being separated from the universe. And yet we do it. Chuck has that diagram in his book, the universe and then me over here, outside the circle. So how could you exist separate from God or separate from the universe? You make up a story that you exist separate from God and believe it. Do you see what I'm saying? So the whole ego thing is a story that we believed because everybody else believes it. And you suffer mightily because it's just you. You are your story. That's all there is. When we get meetings, well, I'm going to tell my story. And the story is what I told myself. It has nothing to do with reality. And so when we come in here, what do we do about that? The story is the world you live in. And we have to smash that world so that we can return to God's world. And that's what we do with old ideas, which is what the story is made out of. That's the only building material there is, are ideas. And so we start smashing them. You remember the idea that we can drink like other people? Boom. The idea that your parents were the worst parents in the world? Boom. Let's go see. Well, actually, they weren't so bad after all. Change. So if you're engaged in this type of activity, you are smashing your ego. And we just want to persist in it. One of the things that Chuck Chamberlain loved to have happen, and he's my big hero, was to be wrong. He just loved being wrong because this was another idea he could get rid of. He could throw it away. That's wrong. And as soon as you throw away something else that's wrong, you come closer to God. You don't have to go there. You just have to get rid of everything that's in the way. And so if you're doing this, you are smashing the ego. It takes a long time, but you are going to be more comfortable, more comfortable. And the now is a very difficult thing. And I gave a talk that lasted an hour on this, and it gets very, very complicated because you have to get rid of time in order to be in the now. You can't have anything that has anything to do with time. That's why I said the Big Bang is still happening. Bill's spiritual awakening is still happening, and we're part of it. You see, there's no time there. And so, in order to be in the present moment, you couldn't have any goals. You couldn't have any causes. You couldn't have, do you see what I'm saying? Because all of those take you out of the now. And because we're structured to anticipate being happy, we're always going to be happy. I'm going to get this guy, get this promotion, I'll be happy. I'm going to be happy. We never take the time to look at the present moment to find out we're already happy. Now, generally, we need help in seeing the present moment in a different way. But if you do that, you will find you don't need to have the next event happen. You already are happy. So when I work with people who say they have problems, I try to work with them to show them that they don't have a problem, that they made it up, and that everything is fine just the way it is.
It's really a pain in the ass when you talk to them about your problems. We are so committed to our story that our story gives us our identity. Our story gives us our concreteness. Our future gives us our salvation. And we are so busy trying to get from the problem to what we think is our salvation, we literally use the present moment as something that's in the way of where we want to go. So as ADD guys want to go right through the present moment into finding the right woman or the right job or the right whatever, and we are much too stuck in our stories. When you find yourself stuck in sobriety, what are some of the tools you start to pull yourself out of the toolbox to help you get unstuck? I use the steps. I use people. I use meetings. Most of us show up in Alcoholics Anonymous with a toolbox entirely full of hammers. We have no saws, we have no pliers, we have no wrenches, we just have hammers. When your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it is what Sandy talked about, the process of finding out that you're wrong. It is the process of getting in touch with reality as opposed to our picture of reality. I think the older you get, you have the opportunity to have it be more willing to be able to get off what you were on. You just have too much experience in life to find, if you're open. And by the way, the only way that we can improve or make a change is to increase our consciousness. I mean, the wisdom of our 12-step, but it said having had a spiritual awakening as a result of that, the only way that we have a prayer of making the significant changes in our lives that we have to do is to increase our consciousness, which is to see things differently than the way we saw them before. We are acting consistently right now with the way we see the world. The only way we are going to make any significant changes is to see it differently. When Chuck talked about everybody's doing the best they know how to do according to their light, and when they have more light, and he said to me, the man on the street right now committing rape is doing the best he knows how to do. And I looked at him like he had 3 years. And he said, right now, you are everything you will ever be. You are as wonderful as you will ever be. And he said, I can tell you're kind of disappointed in that. Not only was I disappointed, I did not understand it, but I understand it more today. The process of finding God and the process of having a spiritual awakening is a process of removal, not one of addition. And most of us as human beings are used to the process of addition and are not accustomed to the process of removal.
Good, Bob. One thing I'd add to that I use is outside literature. I am a big fan of outside literature. Love it. Okay.
Goddamn heretic.
What does that say? Back to the,
About going back back to basics.
basics.
What do you think about going back to something back to basic? You know, the movement of back to basics, you know, that's happening in Alcoholics Anonymous?
Oh, back to the, okay, if that's what it is. Well, this is the way I look at it. The basics are designed to establish contact with God, from which all the answers will come. So if that's what is meant, that we'll go review the steps that cause us to be in contact with God, so that then we can receive all the guidance. See, that's where all the information comes from, is God. On page 164, we realize we know but a little. That's what the authors of the big book said. We put everything in here that we know, and it's a little. Well, where's all the rest going to come from? God will constantly disclose more to you. See it that your house is in order, etc. So, Bob talked about it earlier. We can't rely on a bunch of typewritten words to give us guidance. They only show us how to get connected to God, where we will then get the guidance. So we want to become totally relying on God and not relying on a book or not relying on any set of basics. They're fine, but the jackpot is you're connected to God. The other thing I'll say about back to the basics, if you go online, you can dig out a lot of these. And it was, you know, when they're first getting started, people liked it. Clarence typed up all kinds of things. He had a thing on going to hospitals, how to sponsor people, how to do this, how to do that. And so in different parts of the country, they, in the 40s, typed up how to work the steps. But they typed them up in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago, Minneapolis, and none of them were the same. So which back to basics are we going to go to?
And I have a little different take on that.
Okay. I'm obviously wrong.
No.
But I love being wrong.
I have a different take on it because I think back to basic refers to a movement in Alcoholics Anonymous that Wally P. and some of the people have talked about, and it's kind of like I find it irritating. The idea is that this group of people have discovered that you can actually use the steps in your daily life. And so isn't that a new idea? And that there was a purity and a dedication to it in the old days of Alcoholics Anonymous that we have gotten away from, and back to basics is the movement to go back. It's a conservative movement within Alcoholics Anonymous, and there is a tendency, all movements have a tendency towards codification, and Alcoholics Anonymous goes through that. As a result, we have kind of like schools within Alcoholics Anonymous. We have certain groups that are copied. The Foxhall group and the Pacific group are the two probably most duplicated groups in Alcoholics Anonymous in kind of format and intent. And there are movements which we kind of get back to a dedication to the book and going through it line by line and, digesting everything you can get out of it. And I would, in a certain way, I would consider, and some of the people that I know that are in these movements are some of the best members of Alcoholics Anonymous I know. I do not find the movements as attractive because I think there's some problems in them. I think that there tends to be ego in the movements. There tends to be the fact that we're doing it right. If you're not doing it like we're doing it, there's something lame about how you're practicing the program. And I don't think that's spiritual. I think that that's ego-based, and I have some complaint about it. I think that I did not find, I think we are more dedicated to the book and the steps and sponsorship today than we were when I came in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1967. I think it was easier in 1967 because we didn't have the influx of the new people. We had 30 people for every new person. Now we have 30 new people for every old person, and it's some of the dynamics are different. So back to basics, I think, refers to kind of a Green Beret movement in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that there's some very good things in it, and I think that there's some mischief in it.
I got one more on that, and then we'll take a break. I do recall reading some of the material, and one of the points that was made in there that back then the recovery rate was so much higher than it is today. And you may have heard that. And a group of old-timers put together a paper, I don't know exactly where you can get a copy of it, that really took that to task and said it's exactly the same today as it was. Because in this particular, back to the basics, the way you got into the group in the first place, in order to be a member of the group, you had to have 6 months sobriety, you had to have worked all the steps, you had to have a sponsor, and you had to be vouched for by 3 other members. So this is the statistic that you're starting with. You follow what I'm saying? I think the recovery rate would be pretty high.
Was that a specific group that had those rules? That wasn't A as a whole.
No, it was just
That group.
yeah,
back
maybe
to
Cincinnati or maybe this place. In other words, this is the way they allowed somebody to get in their group. There was the pre-qualification that took place. Well, naturally, your recovery rate's going to be higher than a group who just had a bus of 100 people dumped in their lap, some of whom wanted to be there, some of them weren't alcoholics. And we go, let's see, 100? How many is here next month? Wow, recovery rate's only 2%. Well, you're mixing apples and oranges. The original statistic was of those who sincerely worked the program, 50% recovered, never went back, 25% eventually got it, and 25% probably didn't get it. So, and those numbers are they're almost the same now, of people who sincerely try the program. You can't work in the numbers of a bus being dropped off. That's just that's not a good number. Okay, we're finished and we reassemble at something, 1:30 or something. Thank you. Oh, an announcement.